ethics is more of a primary nature here. And when you say there's never been an incidence of removing the state, we could make analogies about cancer and say there's never been an evidence, of cancer being good for a human body. And this would be, a better way of looking at government, to say that the introduction of coercion takes us away from this ideal state of creation of value, and everything that you're saying that is, an ill of capitalism. It really comes down to this difference in definitions, where you define capitalism as this thing that is backed up by the state. Every criticism, what?
Every criticism I'm levying here continues to exist in the society you're proposing without a state. That's what I'm asking you. That. Why would the absence of a state make capitalism less coercive?
What he's attacking fundamentally is capitalism and the coercion within capitalism. And it seems like the other guy's arguing against the state, but what he should argue is for capitalism. He should be arguing that it is not coercive and why it's not coercive. And it seems like he doesn't really have a good rebuttal to that. I mean, I hope. Well, I don't know. Maybe he does come up with a good rebuttal. I hope he does.
Yeah.
Because capitalism is by definition not coercive in the way that I am defining it.
That's not. Wait, you can't just definition your way out of that question. If a person now,
this is again.
Which is ironic, because that's exactly what Vaush is using to win his argument. He's saying that everything is coercive, and so that's why we need to destroy everything.
Yeah, but to be respectful to Vaush, to be fair to Vaush, what he's trying to say is that you can't just say that my thing is not coercive simply because the definition is that it is not coercive. What he's trying to say is that capitalism is coercive because you're going to die if you don't do something for another person. You can't just say, oh, well, capitalism isn't coercive because it's in the definition. He has to explain why capitalism is not coercive. That's where he's failing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitions is that
this isn't a definitional difference. You're not answering the question.
Well, no, because I'm including in my definition of capitalism that you own yourself, that the ownership of a human being.
That's irrelevant. This is the tautological circle talking that libertarians engage in to avoid dealing with the real world repercussions of their arguments. So let's talk about it. Right now, in our society, which is market-oriented, if you don't like using the term capitalist, there are exploitative forces on the average person. They have to do certain things or they don't get to enjoy a certain quality of life. They're forced into doing some things. How would this change in an ANCAP society?
That's life. You have to do stuff.
Wait. So your argument is that there
He's right. He's right.
He is right, but that's not going to be a good enough answer for Vaush, and I'll explain why. Because he doesn't care if that's just life. He doesn't care if that's just nature. What he cares about, he believes that it's fundamentally a coercive thing to do that. So what he has to attack is why it's not coercive, why it isn't coercive. That's what he needs to attack. So what he's going to do, probably going to do, is he's going to turn around and be like, oh, well, let's say you're on an island and you're going to this and this. He's probably going to be like on a, he's probably going to give him the dick suck coconut island, dick sucking argument probably along in this debate at some point. I feel like the issue is that these guys don't really have a good argument against it, which like the arguments that we made earlier, which was the girlfriend and this argument and that, all these analogies that we gave forward earlier. We don't need to rehash them. If he would have used those analogies, I feel like it would have been a lot more easier for him to explain why it's not coercive. But it seems that he doesn't have a fundamental understanding of why it's not coercive.
Is just going to be exploitation no matter what? You're not saying it wouldn't be exploitative?
No. See, now you're changing the question. You didn't use the word. The way you phrased it was not with the word exploitation.
Coercion.
You said that you're going to have to work. You said you're going to have to work to enjoy a quality of life. Yeah, that's how life works.
Okay, I think. Sure. Okay, wait. So you have to pay taxes to enjoy quality of life.
But rent seeking is a product of government. Being able to work or being able to get value without putting in effort or value is a product of is this rent seeking concept that is a product of statism. that is
Okay,
the
then
perversion
taxes are just a part of
ideal
life. If
capitalism.
you want there to be basic necessities that everyone can enjoy, taxes are just a part of life. You need to fund those somehow. They get taken if you decide
Well,
to work
sure, but there's a better way. Yeah, but there's a better way than that. Like we can have a voluntary system that achieves the same
How
things without all those
would
perversions.
that system not impose coercive measures on the workers of its society?
It's not
Wait,
coercive.
I'm saying a voluntary system. If it's voluntary, where's the coercion? Like, are you implying some other definition of coercion
let me
here?
ask you a
Did I
very
miss something?
let me ask you a basic question, okay? Let's say that you are on a plane and that plane crash lands on an island, okay? There are only a few
You called it.
survivors. In fact, there are only 2. And you wake up after the first one does. By the time that you have woken up, the other survivor in this plane has claimed all of the coconuts on all of the coconut trees, stacked them on their pile, sheltered that pile with all the wreckage from the plane, and declared they own it. And they say that they would be willing to give you said coconuts if you throat their cock. Now, would you consider that to be a voluntary interaction? Is that a voluntary interaction?
Yes.
Okay, so
yes, it is. Yep.
Yes, it is a voluntary interaction because that person doesn't have to give you the coconut. If they don't want to give you the coconut, you can go somewhere else. You can go you can go pound sand. You know what I mean? You're not entitled to another person thing because you're going to die. You know what I mean? And I feel like there's a lot of libertarians that are that are very apologetic about the ideology. You know what I mean? They'll be like, oh, well, that's a little bit coercive or, no, it's not coercive. It's not coercive at all. Because if we were to flip the script and say, again, like the 10 examples that we've given earlier, but I'm gonna give another example. Let's say, somebody's going to die because, like I said earlier, like if they don't have sex with a woman, would you have the right to exclude the scarce resource that is your body from that other person? Yes, you would. I'm sure Vaush would say yes. Of course you would. Well, then, but what about the scarce resource that is a coconut? All of these things are scarce resources. All of these things you can have a dispute over. When you say that you could use this scarce resource, but you can call this scarce resource property, but you can't call this one property, that's arbitrary. That's a completely arbitrary standard that you're setting. That creates disputes between individuals because when you have arbitrary standards, individuals who disagree with that arbitrary have a different arbitrary standard are always going to clash with you. So it's always going to be it creates disputes over scarce resource. It creates conflicts. If I steal a stick from you, right, I could just be like, oh, well, I own this stick, right? Well, actually, I'm going to die if you don't let me use this stick. So you have to let me take it from you. If you don't, actually, I'm going to die if you don't let me take your liver. So, you must let me take it from you. Well, actually, if you want my liver, sir, you kind of have to suck my dick. Oh, well, that's coercive. You can't say that, sucking my dick from your liver is a bad, that I should be allowed to do that because you're coercing me, it doesn't make any sense to give this special status to your body, but then, when it comes to other external resources that can also have disputes over, you give a special status to that. That's really what he's doing. He's giving a special status to the state. He's giving a special status to external resources. And that's really his issue. Yeah, it's not coercive. It is not coercive. Okay.
So no, I'm actually no. No, Vaush. Thank you for that. That's a great way of getting to the next fundamental, I think, misunderstanding here in terms of a definition of property rights. And I think
but you have to answer the question before you can move on.
I'm gonna get to the coconuts and the deep throating. Don't worry.
Yes, no. I just want to know the question answer, and then you can.
Would that be ethical? No, it would be unethical. It would be. I'll say then. If the question is, would that be an ethical situation, or would that be coercive?
Would it be voluntary?
Yes, it would be coercive. Well, it would be based on an illegitimate property rights claim.
That's where he lost.
Really an essential
thing. Lost. That's where he lost the debate, because the second that you say that it's not coercive or it is coercive, then you're you open the door for him to say, "Oh, but wait a minute. Oh, but wait, look at him. You already see it in his face. He's about to be like, "Oh, but wait a minute." So
I'm interested to see what he's going to try to say to back up this position. But yeah, I mean, Vaush
sex work is real work.
That. Yes.
I'll grant you, a lot of libertarians do miss this.
So would it be voluntary?
Right? And so
would it be a voluntary exchange?
That would no, because it is an illegitimate claim to property rights. The same way that the state creates a territorial monopoly on authority.
What's a legitimate claim to property rights?
Mixing your labor with natural resources in the Lockean sense. If it is something that has your labor in it that you have claimed by homesteading or modifying with your labor. And here's the thing.
Wait, but he homesteaded that island.
Will miss. Hold on a second. I'm going to get to that. Because I think this is a really underexamined topic among libertarians, and I would hope that hearing my perspective on this might bring you back to an understanding of property rights that gives you more confidence in voluntarism. Right now, property outside of your body, and even inside of your body, unfortunately, under our current government considering forced vaccinations, is a matter of social consent, right? How much labor can you mix with the soil? How much is required for you to make it yours, right? And if I put up a fence around 1 million acres and say, everything in here is mine because I put up a fence around it, I mix my labor, you'd be like, no, bullshit. I don't think so. You can't just put up a fence around it and claim it. But here in northern Arizona, I bought 11 acres and I put up a fence around it and I'm using it. And generally speaking, society respects that as a legitimate individual claim to natural resources because I'm able to put it to use. I'm able to actually create value with this. But if it were to be abandoned, then it would go back into its unclaimed state. Now, one of the other things here about use of property, a lot of people ask libertarians, but who will build the roads? And the question, as you know,
he didn't even ask that.
Who's actually going to build them? But
yeah, I'm waiting for him to get around to answering the question.
Respectfully to Spike, what his name? Spike Cohen, right?
His name is Adam Kokesh.
Oh, so Adam Kokesh? Sorry, I got him mixed up with another guy.
Yeah,
Adam Kokesh.
Cool.
Respectfully to Adam Kokesh, he kind of lost this debate because you could see the glee in Vaush's eyes when he said that it wasn't coercive. That it was coercive, because the second that he says that it is coercive, you basically give the argument to him, because then he could then stretch that out to pretty much any dispute, over scarce resources. You know what I mean? So yeah,
if you're going to be a voluntarist, you have to stick with the principles of being a voluntarist.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, that's where I think that I don't even really like Vaush that much. I completely disagree with him, but he's a skilled debater and he knows his shit. So if you haven't done your research on his arguments beforehand, you're gonna just run into the situation. You know what I mean? It seems like he didn't he doesn't really. I mean, I'm not gonna say he's not a real ANCAP. He probably is an ANCAP, but he didn't have the good answers or the good ideology. He doesn't know it enough to have the good answers for this, or at least he doesn't fully agree with it. What you call it, consistently, because you kind of have to be consistent with your beliefs, because if not, then someone can just come in and poke a hole into it very easily in the way that Vaush did.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
How do we manage shared property? How do we manage infrastructure of a geographical nature? And here it's really simple. We have setbacks and easements, and you can't build all the way up to the edge of your property in a way that would impede your neighbor's access to their property. Now, here, this consensus of, hey, you don't build within 30
we
feet
are
of the
going
edge of your
so
property.
far off. Wait, can we take this one time?
This gets to property rights. So I told you I was getting to the coconuts and the deep throating. Don't worry. So
he is
this
kind of
is my
rambling.
legitimate claim here,
He's
and
going
I'm
a
not
long way
using
around.
my
Yeah, I
property
think what
to
he's
limit
doing is
another human being.
a lot of people do this in debates where they'll just like ramble on, but
Fine
what's
time.
really going on is that he's thinking about it. He's just rambling, but while he's rambling, he's thinking about it. He's trying to think of a good response because he doesn't have a good response at that moment. So he's just rambling on, just trying to think of a response while he's rambling on. If I was him, I would have just been like, let me think about that for a second. And then, give him the time and then answer the question. But him rambling on just makes him look really bad.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you say that because now that I think about it, it seems like he's going back to the basics of homesteading as if trying to like mathematically work his way there, as if he's like trying to he's trying to build his case for why that is and like figure it out along the way, which is like you would do that in your mind, but it sounds like he's doing it out loud because he wants to make it seem like he knows the answer immediately. But
but he doesn't really know.
Being's right, and this is an inherent right that a lot of libertarians don't adequately consider, is that you have a right to equitable access to natural resources, to homestead unused property. And that being respected would mean that if two people are on an island, there is an incumbent right to equitable access, and one person can't say, I own the entire thing, and use that as an excuse to push the other person off the island.
All right. So do you then have an issue with the idea of owning multiple businesses because you can't possibly work at any one business at any given point in time?
I own multiple businesses. I own
Wait, do you work
Big
personally
Igloo
at all of them?
Geodesics. I own Big Igloo Geodesics, and I own Adam versus the Man, and I own the Freedom Line.
Okay,
what does that have to do with
Yes,
anything?
I work personally.
Adding your anecdotal stories doesn't help in reasonable debate.
Do you think it
But yeah.
Yeah,
it's
I'm not sure
ethical
what that has
for a
anything to do with
businessman to own multiple businesses where they don't actually contribute to the labor of all or even any of those businesses? It was an investment move.
In and of itself, no. But as we know, that is an example in modern society.
Wait, you just said it's not
corporatism.
legitimate evocation of property rights for somebody to lay claim to property that they don't personally use and contribute labor to.
No, they can also trade their legitimately acquired natural property. You can engage in.
Wait, how is it legitimately
exchange as
acquired?
well.
They just bought it, so it's okay to just like buy huge tracts of land in businesses, even if you don't use it personally.
Yeah.
No,
Why
in
not?
the case of land, there needs to be in an anarcho-capitalist society or a true
I
capitalist
want to
society.
say something
or
real
even
quick. Just because you're not physically using something at that moment doesn't mean that you don't own it. Like, do you not believe in storing things? You know what I'm saying? Like, what if I may not be using it at the moment, but if I have a use for it in the future, and I'm not making, and I still haven't boarded it, or I still have a claim on it, then all I'm doing is storing it until I want to use it. So that doesn't mean also, and if you buy a plot of land, and you've got it through consensual means and you homesteaded it, well then, and you're going to use it in the future because it could be for any reason. Maybe I just like to look at it. Maybe I just like to run around in it. Maybe I just like to take a poop in it. You know what I mean? It could be for any reason. If I'm going to use it for me to the end, and I'm going to in the near future or whatever have you, well then that thing is mine and you can't take it from me. I got it through consensual transaction. I got it through homesteading, and I didn't harm anyone to get it. And it isn't harming you that I'm holding it from you. I mean, I'm not responsible for whatever happens to you by me withholding it from you. So yeah, if I want to own a big plot of land, even for a stupid reason, or what some people may consider to be a stupid reason, like just because I want to look at it, well then I have that right.
Yeah, absolutely.
With a voluntary system of government or localization, there would be a standard of what is a respected claim to ownership. And if you're claiming land and simply using coercion to sequester it, that would be unethical. And that's generally
I don't know what you mean by like a legitimate
enforces
acquisition.
an unethical property.
I don't know what you mean by like a
To
legitimate
trade,
acquisition. of property rights. Like, so on the island example,
Okay, so like
the person,
I grow
wait. In the
apples and
island,
you grow
in the
oranges.
island
I
example,
trade an apple for an orange. I legitimately acquired
okay,
the
wait.
orange.
Yes, I understand that
Basic
libertarianism makes sense if you
exchange.
reduce it to Econ 101 questions, but I'm talking about how this would work in the real world. In the island example, that person, the person who collected all of the coconuts, used their labor to collect all of it. Are you saying stuff like land and food should be decommodified and should be equally accessible to the entire population?
No, I'm saying that we should allow the market to produce a natural consensus for what is a legitimate claim to property rights. And when we
That's
do that,
that's
we'll have
weaseling out of the
something.
question. You can't just appeal to consensus. What if the consensus of the market is fuck poor
Coming
people?
from
What
a
if we just buy up all the
democratic
property and
socialist.
rent it back to them at
Yeah.
exorbitant rates, which is what currently happens? What if that's what the market like agrees upon in an ANCAP society?
Well, in a sense, what we're talking
Exorbitant
about
rates.
could be by
I think
that
it's a little bit
sense.
weird whenever a lot of people say this costs too much, that costs too much. We shouldn't charge this much for it. This, in the end of the day, prices are not these arbitrary numbers in which people put on things for some arbitrary reason. They're signals. They're signals to people that, oh, well, I'm willing to sell you this thing for this amount of money, and if not, well, then I don't want to trade with you. That's a signal to other people. If I own something and like a Nike shoe, and somebody wants to buy my Nike shoe, and I'd be like, well, if you want this Nike shoe, you got to give me like $3,000 for it. Oh, that's an exorbitant price. No one should be allowed to charge an exorbitant price for a good or service. Well, it's just like, well, I don't want to give it to you in the first place. So if you want it from me, right, you have to give me something in exchange that I want in exchange for that thing. It's there. There's no such thing as an exorbitant price. Like, yeah, there may be prices that are really high, right, for more higher than you would like, right? But that doesn't that there's no coercion there. In the end of the day, if you want something from another person, you have to trade something with them on a voluntary basis. If not, then you would have to necessarily violate their consent, which violates the NAP, which we're against, which is wrong.
All a product of the market, whatever the current paradigm is, whether it's through voluntary means or through government. If we consent or demand a government, that's what we're going to get. And yeah, what you're pointing out is exactly a product of the current paradigm. And it's because people generally don't care. I mean, a big part of what I'm advocating for is a greater respect for the individual human being, for that right to individual self-ownership, and that basic appeal to ethics, primarily, of something that applies to every individual. And either way,
you're not answering the question again. You're not answering the question. So are you saying that these goods, fundamental human necessities like food and housing and stuff, should this be decommodified, or are you just saying leave it to the market? Because again, then I ask you, what if the market decides it's more profitable to be incredibly exploitative and charge people money, which they can only make by making themselves subservient to another person's authority or by starting their own business in order for them to access those goods?
Right, I'd say that's where we are now. But would you?
You have to answer the question. You can't just keep saying every bad thing that happens right now would be fixed if we had no state.
Could you? I'm in understanding your question. Can you explain how you're using the term decommodified?
Decommodify in the sense that it's not tied to market forces and everyone is guaranteed it, like a ration, basically.
In the sense that I would say yes for land. I would say the individual right to equitable access to natural resources.
Yeah, this isn't good.
Yeah, he lost the debate. No offense. Yeah. Disappointing.
Yeah, it is kind of sad. I mean, like, it's really, really simple. You believe in consent, you don't. You believe in private property, you don't. You believe in self-ownership, you don't. And and there is no in between. And it sounds like he's trying to have the good things of socialism and the good things of anarcho-capitalism, and it just doesn't work because they are antithetical to each other. You can't distribute, as unfortunate as it is that the nature of life is that when people who live on the earth earlier are going to gain property faster than those who live on the earth 100 years in the future. But I think that there's actually a naturally built-in balancing for that, which is that this idea that people who get in earlier on certain products will not have the advantage to technology in the future. So while it's true that some king 1,000 years ago held a massive plot of land with like dukes and people under him that served him, that same king does not have access to the technology that a poor person has access to 1,000 years in the future. So it's like there are benefits and disadvantages to all periods in time to people who get in first. And one day, probably the entire earth will be taken over by private property, and there will be everything will be not commodified, but everything will be,
privatized,
privatized, homesteaded. Everything will, will have an owner, and that may suck for some people who didn't have access to it earlier. But it's like it's this whole idea of like this is how stocks work too. It's like the people who get in earlier to stocks, they don't have as big an advantage because they don't make the money instantly, but later down the line they do. And it's like, why should people who get in on the stocks later have access to that same growth because they didn't that's probably not a super good analogy for it. But like
the second comer principle, so as Stefan Kinsella calls it, the second comer principle, which is essentially like the first. Well, we believe in the first comer principle, which is essentially the first comer to the good is the person who is the owner of the good. First come, first serve. A lot of people like to say. But if you believe in the second comer ethic, well, then you don't have any private property rights at all, because any justification that you use to take that person's property, any other person can then use to take your property, and then no one has property because and we're back to might makes right. And I'm sure Vaush does not agree with that. So
yeah, exactly. But yeah, the point I was just trying to make is that there's like disadvantages and benefits to everything and while some people in the future won't have as much private property as people do nowadays because people have the privilege of getting in first, the people in the future will have access to resources that people in the past will not. So while they'll have less in some things, they'll have more in others. And that's just the nature of the world.
Versus primarily in land and air and water, that I guess in the sort of, I'm not sure, I haven't considered it in these terms, but in that sense, it'd be decommodified from where it is now, in the sense that people have property right claims based on government certificates of landholding that are entirely illegitimate, and society should say that those are illegitimate and allow individuals to homestead or to claim that land, and in doing so open up a huge amount of economic opportunity for so many people in so many other ways. Okay. And so, in a way that if that individual access to land were respected, what you could end up with in the market is a kind of land-based, I hate to use the term UBI, but what do you want an allowance, or do you want wealth to live off of? I think if everybody's claim to equitable natural resources, land in particular, were respected, that we would have much better systems where people could have passive income.
I mean, if you're arguing for the decommodification of basic human necessities like water, food, and housing, then I'm completely in favor of this. Now, you realize that
not food and housing, just the natural resources that are the elements of that. So land and air and water and, access to trees and natural plants and all of that. That is the basic human right foundation, yes.
Okay, but this is nonsensical. You can't
create housing for that.
So you can just take land and trees and
it's
air.
Pretty bad.
What if you need like food? Like, does everyone need to build their own garden and like slaughter their own livestock in order for them to be able to survive?
Well, obviously not. In a system that I'm advocating, we can have incredibly complex systems of interaction and voluntary hierarchies. I'm not against voluntary hierarchies. And like I was getting back with my dome example, and I do have people I'm working with here on an under the table basis, obviously, and I'm just getting this business started. So I'm talking about it like it's an established thing. It's not really, but it still serves as a good example here. So if I want to trade my labor, in making domes and custom building domes, I can do it here. But under the current system of corporatism, if I want to do it on a bigger scale, if I want to have employees, if I want to have a facility, if I want to have corporate accounts with, mail companies, things like that. I mean, for now, it's okay. I'm going to keep running my business sort of underground, but there are limitations that are imposed with that disadvantage me. And if you get rid of the corporatist policies, I would be more able, I would be the disincentives that keep me from creating an above board business and having greater synergy and cooperation.
I don't care about how government regulations hurt the small business owner. I'm really talking
really
about like large
there,
broad.
I care about that.
I understand, but
it seems like they're just going back and forth on the same arguments, you know. It seems like this guy fundamentally, the reason why he lost the debate, and this is why, from what I've seen in the debate, is because Vaush fundamentally believes that if you have to do something for another person in order to survive, like if somebody has something that you need, right? And the only way, and you're going to die if you don't get that thing, or something bad is going to happen to you if you don't get that thing, you saying, give me something in exchange for that thing is coercive, under any situation, essentially. And the second that the guy, he said that, yeah, actually, when you're on the island and the dick sucking analogy, the second that he said, yeah, it is coercive in that situation, that then opened the door for Vaush to be like, okay, well, in every situation, why are you putting an arbitrary standard on every single on this situation? He's using the the arguments that we're making, which is like, you can't just put an arbitrary standard. Oh, well, you can use this. This is exploitation. This is not exploitation. But he doesn't even realize that he has an arbitrary standard himself. Because if I were to ask him, would it be okay for somebody to withhold their body from another person, which is also a scarce resource if they're going to die, I'm sure he would say no, that they would have the right to exclude another person from that scarce resource. So then he would be putting an arbitrary standard on your body, basically. And that would not be very consistent, because you're saying, oh, well, in this situation, I think it's good, or in this situation, I don't think it's good. Well, if in order to be consistent, you would have to say that in all situations, it's good, or in all situations, it is not good. And that's what he's basically trying to do.
Yeah, and the sad thing is, like, he's really close too. Like, he's really close to understanding the ethic around anarcho-capitalism. But he does have kind of he hasn't fully explored like the full process of homesteading and what that means. And it's like, the full process of homesteading is this idea that when you mix your labor with the land, you own that land. So if you collect all the coconuts on the island, which, by the way, is no easy task, that is a lot of labor to do, collecting all the coconuts on the land for an efficient purpose, you now own those coconuts because you went ahead and you mixed your labor with the land. And in the same way that if you build a gate around your home, you have to take care of that area surrounding your home. And that's what it means. And you can't have this idea of, I did one of these videos a little while back, but it's this idea of like, when does it gets into some difficult territory? Like, can people own part of a river if they, build their home around a river? And it does get tricky there. But like, the idea is that if you do, build your property around that river, you own everything within the bounds of your property. Because if you don't, you get into absurdities that would not work in real life. Like, who owns that river? Well, technically, if one person can't own it, then everybody in the world owns it, and you can't make it any less. So that is too far absurd a conclusion to reach. So it has to be.
It's either one or none. It's either one person owns it, or no people own it.
One person or everyone.
And everyone can't own something, because ownership is the right to exclude another person from a scarce resource, and two people can't exclude each other from a scarce resource. So it must be one person. That's why ownership, it must necessarily be individual, because individuals cannot use scarce resources in exclusionary ways at the same time. It's impossible. That's what scarcity is about. So it's either you have the right to use it or exclude other people from the scarce resource, or you don't. If you don't, then anyone else can use any resource at any point for any reason that they want, for any arbitrary reason that they want. So yeah, I think that I'm sure that he is an anarcho-capitalist at heart, but he just probably wasn't really familiar with all of the analogies and all of the arguments that a lot of socialists make. So he was probably just caught off guard with the arguments. You know, a lot of libertarians sometimes they want to have their cake and eat it too. You know, they want to be able to say, I believe in property rights, but at the same time, they don't want to support like people, you know, sucking a dick for a coconut, you know, because they personally think it's disgusting. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You got to either support property rights or you don't support property rights. And if you don't, well, then you're going to be inconsistent. If you're inconsistent, well, then you're going to be very exploited. You're going to be people who are debating you are going to use that against you, like Vaush did. And I called it. I called it as soon as he made that argument. I knew. I was like, yeah, Vaush is probably going to make the coconut dick sucking argument in this debate.
Yep, you definitely called it, and that's exactly what he did. But so, okay, how would you have handled this debate against Vaush then?
Yeah, I would have just been like, listen, like it isn't coercion. First off, I would have just said it's not coercion, like at all, because the second that you say that it is coercion, then you open the door for, like I said earlier, for any situation that entails excluding another person from that scarce resource to be coercion. And that also means it applies to your body as well. And for him to, and then I'm sure like a lot of socialists do, they'll give like a special status to their body, but all their external resources are, you know, you can't exclude other people from that thing. Well, it's just like, well, then you're just making an arbitrary standard in the same way that you were criticizing this guy for making an arbitrary standard. So it's either we're allowed to have arbitrary standards or we're not. I would say we shouldn't have arbitrary standards because that breeds conflict. And you know that you open the door for other people to make arbitrary standards, and then we have a world where everybody has different arbitrary standards, and then like how do we settle that dispute? It must be based on the facts. It must be okay. Well, here's a scarce resource, right? You either have the right to exclude other people from that scarce resource, or you do not have the right to exclude other people from that scarce resource. It is or it is not true. If you do have the right, then you have the right. If you don't have the right, then you don't have the right. And that also includes your body. If you have the right to exclude other people from your body, okay, well, then you believe that property rights are a legitimate thing because you're saying that you're allowed to exclude other people from this scarce resource. You know, and then we can go on to the other analogies, you know, like the analogy with the girl. And the guy who's going to die. Oh, well, I'm going to die in 20 minutes if you don't let me have sex with you. Okay, well, take me out of the date and I'll let you have sex with me. Is that woman coercing that guy by saying you can't use my body unless you take me out on a date? Well, obviously, no, they're not coercing you because she doesn't have to give you her body. That's her property. Her body is her property and nobody else has a right to it. And that's, you know, and then I would just use all the other analogies that we used earlier because we used a whole bunch of analogies that I'm not sure I can all remember off the top of my head. And also like his whole argument with the against the whole like, oh, you have to work, so therefore, you know, you're gonna die. But with a state, if you don't like how they're treating you, you could just leave. Well, when it comes to a situation where someone is quite literally extracting your wealth by force, a literal situation, like not implicit, a literal situation where someone is forcing you to pay into their system, that is completely okay, right? It's okay for you to say it's okay. Why don't you just leave? It's completely okay for you to say that to them on that situation. But whenever it comes to a consensual transaction between two individuals, whether it be a business owner or an employee, all of a sudden that is coercive. If you tell someone to leave a state and they die as a result of that, the state is not responsible. The state isn't responsible for you dying. You chose to leave. Oh, but if you chose to leave the business and you die as a result of starving to death because you didn't work, oh, but wait a minute, that business is exploiting you because if you don't work for that business, you're going to die. So even they're implicitly extracting your wealth. It doesn't make sense. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think another big thing is that I know I wouldn't let this go. I assume you probably wouldn't either, which is this idea that it seems like Adam let Vaush have both definitions. He sort of pushed back on the capitalism definition, but I would have centered this entire debate around the definitions of capitalism and coercion, because I absolutely do not accept Vaush's definition for those two things.
Absolutely.
He used those two definitions. They mean nothing. When you extend capitalism to meaning statism, then capitalism and then there is no definition for a free market, like unless you want us to say free market. But it's like you can't say that capitalism and statism are the same definition. You can't do that, because that makes the free market mechanisms that takes away a definition from it. So I don't know what to call it anymore. So we need to have strict definitions for different things. And it's the same thing with coercion. If you broaden coercion out to such a broad degree, it no longer means anything.
Yeah, 100%. I think you hit on a really good point. And Hoppe, he actually hit on this, I think, pretty damn well, which is that socialism is a spectrum, essentially, of countries that either adopt more state control over the means of production. And his definition of socialism is an institutionalized violation of property rights. And capitalism is an institutionalized recognition of property rights. So under that definition, pretty much any, if we were to say, oh, well, corporatism is capitalism under his definition, pretty much every country would be a capitalist nation. Even the Soviet Union would be considered to be capitalist because they had some capitalism. They had a little bit of capitalism, but it doesn't really work that way. How it actually works is that some countries have some socialism and they have some capitalism, and it's a spectrum. Some countries have more capitalism, like the United States. It generally has more capitalism than other countries, and some countries, like, you know, maybe like Venezuela, they have a lot more socialism in their economy. So it's a spectrum, and if you have full government control over the economy, you have basically communism. You have full socialism, and if you have no government control over the economy, then you have full capitalism. What we're against is having any amount of socialism in the economy. And with no amount of socialism in the economy is capitalism. And that's what we support. We want capitalism. We don't want corporatism. We don't want mixed market socialism or an institutionalized violation of property rights. What we want is full-on capitalism.